We will start in 1 minute, and then we'll do a few introductions and we'll get started. A busy, jam-packed agenda today.
Remember that we have live interpretation, so you can switch to the language you feel more comfortable. Thank you everyone for joining.
Nice to see some friendly faces. Hello, Akram. Hi, Paul. Lots of people joining. I hope everyone is doing well. Give it 1 more minute and then we will start.
We had a lot of people asking for this session, so I think that will be a great session.
Cool, amazing. Well, hello everyone. I hope everyone's doing well. For those of you I don't know, my name is Joe Tanzi. I'm the co-chair of the implementation working group. I've met quite a lot of you now. I've been in post for about 3 months, so lovely to meet you all. As Mechi says, we do have interpretations available, which will be on the bottom of your screen. So if you do want to move to Spanish or English, please feel free to do so. And we will be recording the session. So if you wouldn't like to be part of the recording, please turn off your cameras. And we've started the recording now. And just before we kick off today's meeting, we'd like to congratulate Lviv region in Ukraine, where a total of 71 communities have chosen to adopt the International Open Data Charter principles en masse. And they're committing to the 6 principles of openness, and we very much look forward to hearing from them. I don't know if we've got anyone on the call today from there. If not, we can share a link to a blog, which is on our LinkedIn. So please feel free to have a look to that. I don't know if we do. If not, I'll post that in the chat. So without further ado, we've got a very busy session today, and as Mechi says, a lot of demand for this. The last industry working group, we had quite a lot of questions around that. If anyone, just go on mute if that's okay. Or if not, I can mute them. Thank you very much. So yeah, we've got a great session, open data rankings and measurements, and I'll introduce the 3 speakers we've got today. So first we'll be hearing from Silvana Fumega on a global data barometer. Silvana is the specialist in the intersection of data, policy and inclusion. She co-founded Data Against Feminicide and is a member of the Data Tank's Global Advisory Council. She's been acted as the Research and Policy Director of ILDA until 2022, and since January 2023, she's been an independent consultant while also acting on a Global Data Barometer Projects Director. And Silvana also holds a PhD from the University of Tasmania in Australia. We'll then be hearing from Jamison and Henninger on measuring openness, the open data inventory approach. And Jamison is the open data manager at the Open Data Watch, which is a non-profit organization based in Washington, D.C. He manages several global research projects, including the Open Data Inventory and the Gender Data Compass, which provide benchmarks and recommendations for countries to improve the availability of openness and statistics. And then finally, we'll hear from Cecilia Emilsson. And Cecilia is a policy analyst at the OECD's Public Governance Directorate, specializing in digital government, including open data and the OECD OURdata Index. And she regularly collaborates with government representatives on open data policies and contributes to G20 and G7 discussions. And originally from Sweden, she has a background in economics and experience promoting sustainability-related data sharing in the private sector. So a great agenda today, and I know there was a lot of questions in our last session. So if anyone does have any, please feel free to put things in the chat, and we'll have a discussion towards the end of the session. So without further ado, Silvana, I'll pass over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I hope you can see the screen. I know that many of you already heard me presenting the GDB, so once again, here we go. This time the idea is to be to talk a little bit more about the tool itself and the work that we are doing towards the 2nd edition, but of course I'm going to provide a brief overview of the main findings, but the idea is not to go into the details of the results, but if you have any question or comment about them, I'm happy to answer them later in the conversation. So, well, first of all, once again, thank you to the Open Data Charter for this invitation. It's really nice to be here to share with you the work that we are doing. Basically, what I want to say first is the reason that we started working with the Global Data Barometer. And in that sense, I mean, in today's era, where data-driven insights and artificial intelligence are key, understanding the state of government data foundations has never been more crucial and important. So in that sense, the government data agenda, and in particular, the Open Government Data Agenda movement, that since we are here at the Open Data Charter working group, started several years ago. About 15 years or 20 years, depending how you count it, the open data movement started with a simple yet powerful belief. If we make government data open, people will naturally come, use it, and generate both social and individual value. However, we know that our experience over the past few years have shown that the reality is a little bit more complex. Today, the discussions include a range of interconnected issues, for example, privacy and data protection, ensuring that data is handled with care and respect for individuals' privacy. Also, for example, human rights in technology, focusing on protecting human rights in the development and deployment of technological solutions, as well as, of course, data governance to assess how to establish robust structure to manage data effectively, ensuring quality and inclusion, among others values. So basically, the complexity added to the initial open government data agenda by these issues is now significant. Our work is now interconnected with various areas and groups that we might not have considered or engaged with more than a decade ago. So this complexity asks for new ways of assessing our work and the status of the agenda, and that's where the Global Data Barometer started to be developed in 2020. It was based on previous studies, like for example, the Open Data Barometer, but it provides a broader scope in terms of data foundations for healthy ecosystems. The first edition was based on primary data collection with a global expert survey carried out in mid-2021 in 109 countries and was combined with secondary data sources to generate a range of metrics. The period that we measured at that point at the first edition was May 2019 to May 2021. And the tool was looking at the landscape beyond just open data and through a series of thematic lenses. I know that Tom is here. We look at, for example, with our partners from Land Portal at LAN, also political integrity with OGP and Transparency International, public contracting with OCP, company information with open ownership, and public finance with GIFT, to name just a few. And some of the numbers from that first edition are here. I mean, we cover 109 countries, as I mentioned. We had 12 regional hubs, 6 thematic partners, 39 primary indicators, and more than 60,000 data points. Inside the report on the website, you can find also information on more than 1,100 datasets, more than 900 frameworks, and more than 70 open data initiatives. In order to gather all this data, regional partners hire national researchers in each of the countries who were trained according to our handbook and all the materials we provided. And after the researchers did the fieldwork with the help of coordinators in each of the regions, in the regional hubs, a review was conducted also with the support of our thematic partners. All the data collection and the review process took place in the second half of 2021. And in spite of that, of the review process, also all responses and justifications are available on our website, as well as a feedback channel in order to share any comments or questions to help us continue to improve our work moving forward. The data collected show us, I'm with 2 screens, so sometimes I have to move from one place to the other. So basically, the data collected allow us to show how countries are performing against each module. However, it's important to highlight, and it's really important for us, to say that the GDB is more a rating than a ranking. Primary indicators and scores are based on a 0 to 100 scale. where 100 is designed to measure best practices defined against internationally agreed frameworks. So while comparison between countries can be used to look for relative strengths and weaknesses, the greater value in the model is in showing individual areas for improvement in each country and enabling them to target and track improvements over time. Moreover, one other clarification that I'd like to make is the barometer norms are designed to be attainable today. In that sense, if we take the maximum score given on each indicator and we build an imaginary country that combines all the best performance found in different countries, it would score 95.92. So proving that virtually all countries should be able to attain high scores with time and effort. And I want to keep that in mind when looking at the scores there of the general scores in the modules. That is not that it's impossible to get higher scores, it's that we need to do much more work in order to attain those. Now, I'd like to provide some general observations on the state of data for the public good. Again, I'm not going to go into the details of the results, but we can discuss them if you have questions or comments about them. First of all, developing and using data for the public good is possible. As I mentioned, virtually all norms established by the barometer are in theory attainable today. However, the scores, as I showed a few minutes ago, show us that there is still a long way to go. Also, when thinking about open data, that is still a key component of this measurement, we could say that the open data agenda is still alive, but it's no longer progressing in a linear way. It's not increasing at the same rate that it was a few years ago. I think there's a microphone open. In that sense, I mean, as I was saying, I mean, it's not increasing at the same rate that it was a few years ago. So although new national open data initiatives have launched in 2016, that it was the last global edition for the open data barometer, that it was the previous study, there was another regional report, like the one in 2020 was the last open data barometer edition in Latin America. But based on the global report, some new national open data initiatives have launched and others have disappeared. However, in the instances where initiatives have been sustained, they are often now better resourced and more embedded than they were in the past. And also, it's fair to say that open data principles have been embedded in a number of sectorial initiatives. Also, I'd like to make a point about capacity gaps. And when I'm saying capacity, I mean skills, training, infrastructure. They remain a significant barrier to delivering value from data. While the digital divide may be narrowing in some places, gaps still exist across governments, private sector, civil society, and is a gap in their ability to create and use data for the public good. Another key takeaway is that well-drafted frameworks deliver better data. When rules are explicit about data collection, management, and sharing, data is much more likely to be available, useful, and sustainable in addressing any number of issues for the public good. And also, lastly, in terms of the results, I want to highlight collaboration. In that sense, collaboration between traditional civil society and civic technologies, for example, or journalists and private sector applications providers are driving new uses of data that highlight corruption, promote public integrity, to monitor environmental issues or shape public policy debate. There are some examples there that I'm showing you. You can also look for many more examples in our report, as well as the quality data on our website that you can go and check what the researchers in each country say about different topics. And also, one other thing that I want to be clear about is that there is evidence that partnerships and the work of international organizations in terms of advocacy of certain topics is showing results in terms of advancing the data agenda. This is a clear point that we see, for example, with open contracted partnership, that agenda has moved a long way, and in many cases it's because of the work that they've been doing for the past few years. To finish the presentation, because I don't want to take too much time, because there are many things to listen and to talk about, I like to talk about some methodological updates that we are working on. I mean, we're currently working on the second edition of the Global Data Barometer. Here, basically, what you have there is how we split some of the modules that I was discussing before in smaller areas called action areas that we adapted to better assess and being able to evaluate not only foundational frameworks, but also capacities in terms of the effective data production, storage, publication, and use. We divided that between our core governance and capability modules or areas, and also the thematic cluster where all the topics are included there. As I said, I mean, you can see there that we have, for example, land action areas that we developed in the first edition with our partners from Land Portal that are here in the call as well. One other thing that I'd like to emphasize is a new addition. Basically, in addition to the areas that we already measure, what we are going to do in the second round is to incorporate cross-cutting themes throughout different aspects of the survey, and that could help us provide a more comprehensive analysis. By integrating these cross-cutting themes and details of questions, the GDB can provide a richer or more insightful analysis of the practical impacts of data foundations and identify areas for improvement to maximize the benefits of data within societies. Some examples, and you can see there, this is just a graphical interpretation, but for example, we are going to be looking at use of data via these cross-cutting themes, which includes sub-questions and primary and secondary indicators that help us assess how data is used, and also to help us assess the supports available for data reuse. Another critical cross-cutting theme is artificial intelligence, as we know is a current and it's a trendy topic these days. And this cross-cutting theme is going to examine through sub-questions related to the readiness of data for AI technologies. So what we are going to do is, with the recurring sub-questions and also adding secondary indicators, we're going to look at the progress and the challenges of data foundations associated with AI deployment in different regions. And also, one thing that is very important for us that we're going to measure in different ways, but also with a cross-cutting theme, is inclusion, focusing on gender and accessibility. What we are going to do with this cross-cutting theme is to add to the action areas and thematic cluster to this theme in order to address how inclusive data policies and practices are, considering representation and participation of diverse groups. In that sense, I mean, the GDB assesses whether data ensures that all segments of the population can access and benefit from data, thereby promoting equity and reducing disparities via several sub-questions and indicators. So I'm going to end here, but before of that, I want to invite everybody to look at our report. We have online the report and the data from the first edition, and you can go there and look at the results by country, by module, and also finding any additional reports. We are currently working to present all the new results based on the updated framework during the first semester of the 2025. And also, I mean, one other thing that I would like to add, and this is coming, I mean, here is the website, and also I can share with you later if you want it. Something that we are also working on in the meantime, and I think is really key for this conversation. It was launched this morning, and I guess Jamison can talk a little bit more about that if somebody is interested. I mean, it's about the commitments to join efforts with other measurements exercises as part of the UN OURdata Forum commitments that Open Data Watch is leading. And it was, again, launched this morning with a webinar. We are going to be working on that during the next few months. So if you want to know more, or if you want to join us in this effort to find new ways of collaboration and maximize resources, please contact me and we can talk and discuss about that. So I'm going to stop here because I don't want to take much time. And again, I know that many of you already heard me talk about these things, so I wanted to have some time for later for comments and questions that I think is going to enrich the conversation. Once again, thank you so much to the Open Data Charter, and I'm happy to listen to the other presenters and the questions that are going to rise later.
Silvana, thank you so much. It's so interesting and so much to take away on the various scores. So interesting. I'm sure many people on the call will have questions, so please feel free to put them in the chat. We will have a kind of a discussion at the end, but we'll go to the three presenters first, and then we'll open to a forum. But do write your questions in the chat so we can kind of pick them up and then put your hands up after. So our second presenter is Jamison Henninger on measuring openness, the open data inventory approach. So Jamison, over to you. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. We talk to all the folks for the Open Data Charter. Thanks for the invitation. Silvana, it sounds like you have some exciting things for the Barometer set up, but instead of asking questions on that, I'm going to be here to talk about the open data inventory. So give me 1 second to share my screen. Okay, I think everyone can see it now. So this is a great time to be talking about this because right now we are in the 7th edition of the Open Data Inventory, which is a flagship project of my organization, Open Data Watch. So during this presentation, I'm just going to give you a primer on some of the methodology and introduce some aspects of the results, and then I'll share the robust methodology guide with everyone afterwards, so you can look into a lot of the things I'll be talking about today in more detail. So let's just start with some basics about what the Open Data Inventory is and what it measures. So Open Data Inventory, or ODIN, as I'm going to refer to it shortly, is an index that measures both the availability or coverage of government data, statistical data, and how open that data is. So ODIN does focus on aggregate statistical data published by governments. And so we only look for, in terms of data availability, data that's published, collected by government, and published on government websites. So that's one key aspect I want to focus on, because we're really focused on the country's capacity to produce open statistical data, so we don't look at any kind of international sources of data. So ODIN started in 2015 and initially was just conducted in low-income countries. I believe there's only about 70 countries that were included in that round. ODIN was then conducted annually until 2018. But since 2018, we now conduct ODIN every 2 years. And in the latest round, which is ongoing currently, the results will be published later this year. There's going to be 199 countries in this version of ODIN, the largest number of countries yet. In ODIN, we look at data across 22 different data categories, which I'll show you in a few slides. And then we're piloting one category this year called digital connectivity. That's not going to be inputted into the score. Additionally, we have another index that I don't have time to talk about today called the Gender Data Compass, which we consider kind of an ODIN-like index that focuses on gender data. And why we created this index is that for many of the results that we've seen from the last few years, gender data, sex disaggregated data specifically, tends to be less available and less open than other types of data that we look for in ODIN. And so we created an entirely separate index to look more into some of the reasons around this and to help countries improve gender data specifically. Okay, so first I want to show you this map of the results from 2022. So right now we're in the middle of the 2024 round. Dark green are countries that score highest, red obviously countries that score lowest. And these overall scores represent a combination of both scores on data availability and data openness. So just for your FYI, the top country in the latest round of ODIN 2022 was Singapore, followed by Poland, Denmark, Finland, and Norway. No country scores 100% on our index. Singapore leads all countries with a score of 90, although they do score 100% on openness. Okay, a few other results here. You can see results over time, starting with 2016. So that's when we expanded the index to include more than just the low-income countries, all the way to 2022. And if you look at the scores over time, for between 2020 and 22, you'll start to see scores start to stagnate. We attribute a lot of this to a lot of delays and issues primarily with national statistical offices, but also other line ministries during the pandemic. And so we're kind of eager to see if the results from 2024 show a rebound of much of the kind of rate of increase in coverage and openness that we've seen throughout the different assessments. As you can see here, it trended largely upwards until 2022. Most of the declines that we saw were in countries in Africa and in the Pacific Islands. And so in between rounds, Open Data Watch does a lot of technical assistance with countries, workshops and trainings to help them understand their scores and make improvements. And we're working with a number of African countries right now through a partnership with the African Development Bank. So this remains to be seen whether this progress can be rebounded. So let me tell you a little bit about how we measure specifically coverage or availability. So these are the 5 different aspects that go into the coverage scores. So first we look to see, are the data available and disaggregated? So we have a list of representative indicators that we look at. I'm going to describe those a little bit later. And what extent are they disaggregated? So we have key disaggregations that we look for every single indicator. We also look to see how much data are published over the last 5 years and last 10 years. So we don't look for any data older than 10 years, but different scores are given based on the number of years that we can find for specific indicators in these certain time periods. And then we look for the availability of subnational level data. So we divide this in 2 different divisions, the first subnational level, the second subnational level. The second subnational level is more granular, and this all varies depending on which indicators we're looking at. Obviously, indicators maybe like national accounts or international trade data, right? We wouldn't expect to find subnational level data. So most of the subnational level data that we look for in ODIN is only going to be regarding social statistic indicators. Okay, so here's a snapshot of the scores that we found in 2022 based on those 5 coverage elements that I just went over. By far, the lowest scoring element in coverage that we see across literally all countries is the availability of data at the subnational level. And this is largely attributed to the cost that is involved in collecting data at these levels, or in some countries, the lack of ability to anonymize data sufficiently to feel comfortable publishing it, especially in open formats. Okay, now you might be more interested in how we measure openness in the open data inventory. The first 2 elements that we look at have to do with the file formats. Is the data available in a machine readable format? And is the format also non-proprietary? We also look to see what download options exist. And this is all stems from the idea that the data should be more accessible. So we look at different download options that enable better accessibility. So this would be bulk downloads, the presence of an API, or the presence of kind of user select options that allow people to customize the data prior to downloading the data, instead of just getting maybe a predetermined data set that is created for them. Okay, we also look at how much metadata is published with each data set, and we do focus on reference metadata because this is the type of metadata that really helps users understand what is being measured and how they can reuse that data set. And then we look for obviously the data licensing for the data sets as well. So this is what determines the openness scores in the open data inventory. And looking at results across all those elements, data licenses are by far, year after year, the lowest scoring element. We have seen a lot of progress, since 2016 for sure, but there's still a lot of work to be done, especially in line ministries. They don't understand the concept of data licenses. A lot of national statistical offices that we work with have started to come around, but really the lack of licensing, in our opinion, based on the countries we work with, comes down to the lack of knowledge about why a license is required and how they go about adopting a license. Okay, just a few more slides here. These are the 22 data categories that we look at in ODIN. And you'll see there's a few more social categories and economic and environmental. Across the 22 categories, there's 65 indicator topics that we look at. And then we identify certain data sets that a country might publish in order to get credit for that topic. So for instance, under pollution, one of the indicator topics is air pollution, right? So the country might publish data on the amount of particulate matter in the air, or you might find data on different measures of air quality, or the country might publish data on one of the related SDG indicators that we accept. So we have a number of different accepted data sets under each of the topics to really kind of allow a little bit more customization for the country and to allow for data sets that might be more relevant to some countries than other countries. Okay, for scoring, we weight all the social, economic, and environmental categories equally. So all the scores are given for each category, not each specific indicator. And so because we weight everything equally, that means even though there's less environmental and economic categories, they're still given the same weight as all the social categories. Okay, in general, economic data generally scores higher than much other types of data, simply because we think there's a lot of more international standards and guidelines, technical assistance given to countries to produce this types of data. But the gap between social and environmental data is getting closer. And in fact, we've seen environmental data scores drop since 2020. And we not exactly sure why this is, but it has been driven largely by African countries. We're assuming the frequency of data dropped in these types of data sets more so during the pandemic. But in social data, I mentioned earlier that gender data tends to be some of the low scoring categories. So that does contribute to low scores in social data, as well as data on food security and nutrition, and crime and justice. These are some of the lowest scoring social categories that we see across countries. Okay, so just to conclude, you can go to our website, odin.opendatawatch.com, to find a lot more information. You'll find the global rankings page. You'll find in-depth country profiles, as well as regional profiles. You can download all the scores, as well as all the specific country data sets that we found when we did the assessment, and then the global report where much of the findings that I just went through can be found, as well as the latest methodology guide for this round can be found on the homepage. So thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to talk to you about this, and I'm happy to answer questions when we get to the Q&A.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Jamison. So interesting, and it'd be fascinating to know what the countries here that are doing well, such as Singapore, Poland, Finland, are doing well compared to other governments. But I'm sure I'm not going to steal the limelight in questions before everyone else. So I'll go to our final speaker. But again, if you do have any questions, please write them down, put them in the chat. We will have at least 15 minutes for Q&A. So our final speaker is Cecilia Emilsson. And Cecilia will be talking about our data index. So Cecilia, over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. You can see the slide, yes? Correct?
Yep.
Great. First, I just wanted to say thank you for inviting the OECD and myself to present about this topic and the OURdata index, and also happy to see the other colleagues presenting about their indexes. And I know this is a very important topic for government representatives and civil society actors to understand what we are measuring and a little bit more how they compare to each other. So I think it's a very important discussion. So first, just the OURdata index stands for the Open, Useful, and Reusable Data Index. It's quite a long name, but we have shortened it that way. And it was originally developed to monitor the implementation of the G8 Open Data Charter. And the first edition was a pilot in 2015. And since then, we have had editions every 2 years, except for the latest edition that was launched last year. So we had 4 editions plus several regional editions that we have covering Latin America and the Caribbean and Southeast Asia. So, as I said, compared to the other indexes, we have obviously the focus of the OECD is to measure the performance of policies and implementations among OECD countries, as well as countries that are in the process of accession to the OECD, but we're also having a lot of regional programs. So increasingly, we are expanding the coverage of the OURdata index, which you will probably see a little bit later next year as well. And for the latest edition that I will speak about, we are now focusing a lot more on what we call high-value data sets. And I will describe a bit more here about the methodology behind the OURdata index. So this is the same overall methodology that we've had since the first edition in 2015. There have been some changes for the newest edition that was really made to make sure that the index stays relevant and really because there has been a lot of developments. Jamison was talking about the APIs and other aspects that we are now measuring. And so, but principally we have the OURdata index has 3 main pillars. So we have data availability, data accessibility, and then the final one, which is government supported data reuse. So we're not only measuring the actual data made available, but also other aspects in terms of open data policy and engagement with different stakeholders. So we have 9 different sub-pillars here, and below those we have over 670 data points, which I understand now is not very many if you compare to some of the other indexes, but for us, it's more than before. So, so the first pillar is, we have a paper I'm going to share that describes the methodology in detail and all the different indicators below, but there are quite too many to show here. But really the first data availability is focusing on the content of the policy, looking at if there are requirements for public sector organizations to publish open data. We're also looking at now if they have a strategy for open data in place or an action plan. And here we also look at the engagement of public sector organizations with different stakeholders to inform open data release. So to understand what data demand there is in society among businesses and civil society, and also among public servants, because public servants also use open data. And then here also we look at implementation, and there is the actual availability of open data. And I will go into more detail there how we look at this. And then for the second pillar, it's data accessibility. And here we look more into the requirements on, so to say, formats, metadata quality, and other aspects that make open data not only available, but accessible and easy to reuse. We'll look at the stakeholder engagement for focusing more on data quality and completeness. And here there's a lot of focus on the national open data portal that a lot of countries have, majority of countries have today, and implementation. And there we look at, out of those data sets made available, how accessible are they in terms of formats and other aspects. I will show more in the following slides. And the final pillar is the government supported data reuse. And here we look at the different initiatives and partnerships with the private sector and with civil society actors. We also look at the different programs within government to increase data literacy and open data literacy. So both in terms of understanding open data and how to make the open data available, but also how the public servants can reuse open data and reuse data within the public sector. And then the final one is monitoring impact. So we're not estimating the impact of open data through the OURdata index, but we're looking at how governments themselves are attempting to do this, which we know is very hard. And also to add to this, which is also can be different to the other indicators, is that we are the survey that is what we collect data for the OURdata index is actually conducted together with government units, so those responsible for open data policies at the central federal level of government. So I know that some other indicators are using more, it's another approach, but we still have a very solid data validation process where we go through all the evidence and do all the checks and follow up with the countries and make sure that the data is correct. So as I mentioned earlier, we have made some changes to the latest edition, which took some time, which was why the latest edition was a bit delayed. So some of the main updates that we have done is that we now, for example, assess also the availability of an open data strategy or action plan, which we didn't before. We are also looking at if there are any requirements for public undertakings, so not only public sector organizations, but also, for example, state-owned enterprises that often hold very valuable data sets to publish open data, and also to look at if there are requirements for organizations that produce publicly funded research data. We also have a little bit more focus on some good data management practices that can be useful to make open data publication easier, which is, for example, data inventorying. And then the final one, which I mentioned earlier, is also we have increased a lot the scope and assessment of high-value data sets, that we call them. And also each of these data sets are now raised based on these different criteria, which includes API access. But we have the report with all the indicators and also describing a little bit of the changes that I'm going to share in the chat later. So I go directly into the results of the latest edition. So the global results, or the total results, but as you can see here, we have the three main pillars. We have for data availability, we have 48%. So the OURdata index goes from 0 to 100 or from 0 to 100%. So the 48%, the second one, data accessibility, which there is the highest performance, is 59%. And then the third one, which is the lowest performance, is in the government support to data reuse at 37%. And here we have the ranking, which I agree with Silvana that the ranking can be useful, but it's not always, sometimes it's more, it provides an overview, but it doesn't show the full performance of a country, and sometimes it's hard to compare countries. But here you can see the latest ranking from 2023, where we have Korea in the top. We have France as the second one, and this is actually what we had also in the 2019 edition, which was before we made these edits to the methodology. We also see that to the right, you see that we have a few, some of the accession countries to the OECD. So we have Brazil, Peru, Croatia, and Romania. There are also others that are not included here. And for the OECD countries, we do not have Hungary and the US for this edition, but we are working for the next edition, of course. And coming to the availability of high-value data sets, which here we show the overall results. So what we considered based on the earlier presentation, what we assess. So we separate availability and accessibility of high-value data sets. So in terms of availability, it's just the basic, the minimum requirements, so to say, for it to be counted for us, which here we said that should be machine readable, it should be free of charge, and should be an open license. So that should be, because it also fits into the OECD definition of open data, which was released in 2021 as part of one of our recommendations, and I can share that as well. And here you see for the 10 categories that we have company ownership, which is one of the lowest performing categories. We have Earth observation and environment, spatial data, meteorological data, mobility, statistics, government finances and accountability, crime and justice, education, health and social welfare. And under these categories, there's several, under these themes, there are several categories, and they're all, there are different number of categories within each theme, but as with the open data inventory, they are also weighted equally. So this, as you can see, and you can see that there is an overall performance is better in the spatial data and statistics and Earth observation environment. But then when it comes to company ownership, company registry, company ownership, and government, which government finances and accountability. And here in the paper we have, it also lists all the types of data that we are assessing, but it includes, for example, public procurement, in following the open data contracting standard. It also includes election results. It includes budget and a bunch of other ones. But this is the result for availability. And here you can see the rankings. So we also have a ranking for that you can see how countries are doing. So at the total, they're ranked based on the total performance, so not based on the different themes. And you can see that here you have France actually doing better. We see other countries that are doing maybe less well in the overall performance of the index are doing actually better in the availability of open data. And then the final one, I talked about the accessibility of high-value data sets. So here is what we are looking at. So we are looking at whether the data set is up to date. We look at metadata quality. So we look at what the metadata covers. And also if it's using like standard metadata descriptions. We look at non-proprietary formats, API access, and also whether the data is accessible or not through the central portal. As we see this as a key point, that means that a data set can, the change we made also from the previous edition, I tried to go a bit quicker, is that previously we only assessed data sets available on a national open data portal, but now it doesn't matter whether it's where it is available, but we do give a bigger score here if the data set is available on the central portal as well. So for example, when it's the statistics data, you can have it on the statistics portal, but it may also be available on the central portal. And so the main messages we have is that the performance in the accessibility and quality of data has improved as we've seen it. Still, we only see that on average, a total 48% of high-value data sets are available as open data across OECD countries. We see that based on the third pillar, that there was quite a low performance. There's a lack of systematic engagement with potential data users, both businesses and civil society, and that this could be improved. We also see that efforts are needed to monitor the impact of open data. And this is something that we are thinking about looking at a little bit closer to how we can support that. Thank you. This is, if you want to have more, I will share the report. And otherwise, I hope that maybe they can share this, the team can share this presentation, but happy to answer any questions that you have.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Cecilia. And we'll share all the presentations after. We'll share them around over email. Again, really interesting, especially on the point of how government support to reuse data is the lowest. Wonder if that ties into the skills and capabilities Silvana mentioned previously. Akram, I will come to you first, as I believe I missed that you had a question. So if you still have that question, not to pick on you, I'll let you kick things off, and then other people, please put your hands up.
Thank you, Joe. Thank all our presenters. I have the question to all our presenters. The same question to Silvana and to Cecilia. Okay, Global Data Barometer last time assessed 109. And as I see, so Cecilia is about less than 50 countries assessing. Do you planning to expand and cover more countries? And one question to Jamison. Hi, Jamison. Nice to see you again. You told about one more, one more. I mean, digital connectivity. Can you explain more about this in your ODIN? Thank you.
Silvana, do you want to go first, and then we'll go around in order?
Yep. Yeah, I was waiting for the sign. Well, hello again, Akram. I mean, I think we run each other in every open data charter meeting. The idea is to, with each edition, trying to include more countries. Sorry, I have a cold. For this particular one, the second edition, probably we first gonna test some of the updates at a regional scale. We are gonna focus on Africa, Latin America, but also looking at how to move forward and think about how to expand and include more countries. That's always the goal at the end of the day. But probably in this particular time, we're going to be focusing on two particular regions that are Africa and Latin America. But I'll let you know as soon as we have a clear plan about the coverage.
Jamison, come to you.
Yeah, so my question was on the new data category that we're including this year. I don't think anyone's asking ODIN to include more than 199 countries in our index. But yeah, we have a new category, digital connectivity. We're piloting 2 indicators on internet use and a mobile network use as well, just to kind of see what kind of data is out there and seeing if this is a category that we want to include in the next edition of ODIN to be scored. So more information on those indicators is available in our methodology guide, but you'll see that the list of accepted data sets is a little bit broader because we're using this as a piloting exercise to see what types of data are there.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And Cecilia, anything you'd like to add?
Yes, if it was about the coverage of countries. So we are, as I said, the primary index, I mean, is for the OECD membership, but then we have, if I could choose, I would cover the whole world. So, but we have regional programs. So I know we are working with Latin America and the Caribbean. We are with Southeast Asia because there are regional programs at the OECD, but there are also other regional programs. So I think that in the future, it will probably be even more extended, perhaps to Africa, Balkan, and the MENA region, but it's a bit more bureaucratic process at the OECD to run these sort of exercises. But definitely from our side, and I think from the OECD side, these type of the work of the OECD will expand, and probably also the OURdata index.
Amazing. Thanks, Cecilia. I will come to Charles Tom next, and then Chris, I'll come to you. So over to you, Charles Tom.
Hi, thank you very much to all the presenters and also to Mercedes and the team for putting this together. I really enjoyed it, and it was nice to learn about, get a little bit more detail about the work that I guess we've all seen to some degree, but never had a chance to discuss. So I was wondering, and this is once again for all the presenters. So my question is really, have you faced any criticism about the usefulness of your indices? And if so, how have you responded to such criticism? And by that, I mean, do you have any experiences or evidence about how the indices are used, or by whom the indices are used?
Silvana,
Do you want me to follow the order?
Yeah.
I mean, as you know, Tommy, we have only one edition first. I mean, before this one that we are working with. In the general sense, we don't have like that experience in particular about complaints, who is using and why they are using. Quite the contrary, in many cases, we have requests for more countries or more topics or things like that. But at least in my particular experience, we haven't experienced those kind of things. Yes, of course, I mean, we have several conversations with partners about coverage, about particular or sensible or topics or countries or regions and so on. But after the data was published, at least in our case, we didn't find that particular comments.
Yeah, so ODIN does face some criticism from countries from time to time, especially now that the coverage portion of the open data inventory is now being used as SDG indicator 17.18.1, measuring the statistical capacity of countries to produce data for the SDGs. But one thing that really helps mitigate a lot of these criticisms is that we have a pretty transparent process with countries. We allow them to review the data sets prior to the data being finalized. So it is an independent assessment, but because of this, it really allows us that engagement with countries so that they can better understand their scores, know why we're not accepting certain data sets, be transparent about the scoring process. And I think that has really mitigated a lot of the criticisms that we've had. And we've had that process in place since 2017. But other than that, maybe countries might disagree with us, but because we're very transparent about the methodology, the scoring, we provide tools to help countries score themselves. I think even if they might disagree with some of the results, they can at least understand why, the scores that they have are the way they are. And we know we have lots of documented use cases of ODIN. I mean, for instance, the World Bank uses ODIN as part of their SBI, the statistical performance indicators. And many countries that have ongoing projects with the World Bank will use ODIN as a benchmark of their progress in open data. That combined with the many workshops that we do, especially in between years, and seeing that the countries are making progress and they come back to us and tell us about the progress and the things that they've been doing, because they want to make sure they get credit for it in the next ODIN assessment, has made it even easier to document that progress. And so also, you can always speak to Akram from Uzbekistan, who is a very engaged user of ODIN as well.
I jump in as well. For the OECD, we are trying. Of course, we are always in close contact with not the main audience, but the government representatives who are often using the OURdata index to inform policies. And I think I saw it in the chat sometimes to use the results to influence decision makers. And I think that's something we've seen. Sometimes we've seen the OURdata index being used, for example, but to show how the performance of the country and how the impact of a certain program or something has been done. We also think that, for example, we've heard also that we know that there is interest from non-government actors to use data and to have more easy access to the data. We get quite frequent requests from researchers that want to analyze the data. So we know that there is interest, and we try to have, but we try to always also improve, and that was one of the main reasons why we did the revisions to the index, because there was some criticism also about the index not reflecting all the country characteristics. It's hard for some countries to score because they have this decentralized governance environment, etc. And we're trying to adapt and make it even more useful, so that countries and especially policymakers think is useful. But yeah, that's a long explanation, but I think we try our best, but it can always be improved, I think, and it can always be made even more useful. And I think for us now, I think one of the main points is really to make it as accessible as possible and make it as transparent as possible, as Jamison said, because it's not possible to have a perfect methodology, but then as long as you can see and understand the methodology, you can at least explain it and use it, and if you can reuse the data easily, it's better. And that's what we are trying to do even more ahead, I think.
May I add something because I understand that Tommy was asking about criticisms about different uses of the data, not the results themselves. I mean, in terms of the results themselves, we always, as the other exercises, we always have questions and conversations with different governments and different countries about their results. So in that sense, yes, and in the same way that Jamison was explaining, we have everything open and available to be done, not only the methodology, but also the the answers that the researchers provided. So it's very open, and then you can agree or disagree with that, but it's pretty open review, so it's easy to access. I was thinking more about uses for certain uses of the data later. In that sense, we haven't received criticisms, but in the case of discussing about the results, I guess it's part of the measurement exercise that you need to give explanations and to be transparent about how you get to certain results, and open the data also to be available for everybody to use and reuse.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think all the speakers answered the question in their own way, and you're right, Silvana. I mean, I was asking about not so much sort of the contestation about having an index and where countries score, because I can imagine that is always a little bit of an issue, but also you know, when we are engaging especially the land community, one of the questions that resurfaces, say, it's kind of, I guess, making the switch from open data for its own sake to data for what, data for whom, and I think trying to sort of understand the sort of power dynamics in data. And I think it's sort of deepening a conversation about openness, where openness is not the goal, but sort of an intermediate step to actually achieve something else. And I think the land community perhaps is also maybe a little bit lagging behind in that area. And you see from the GDB assessment, one of the lowest performing categories was tenure and use. So this is kind of a developing conversation. And I just found it very interesting to also draw from your experience, because yes, we have agreed that transparency in terms of how the data is collected, what you score, how you score it, is key, because it's not so much the final score that is really the goal, but it's also a means of engaging with government. It's a tool to initiate a discussion around improvement. So, I mean, I think the answers are very useful for me and the work that we are doing and continue to do. So thank you very much for that.
Amazing. Thank you very much, all. And I'm conscious we're already 1 minute over time, and I'm sure we could speak for at least another hour on this alone. And I'm sure there's many more questions, but we will have to wrap things up. Firstly, a thank you to all of our 3 speakers. I think everyone would agree the insights have been absolutely fascinating. And we will be sharing a bit of a blog post after. As well, we will be sharing around the presentations that everyone's done. So please look out for them on the email. I hope everyone's found this useful. Again, we do these every Tuesday, the last Tuesday of the month. So please attend the next one. If there's anything you'd like to see on them, please feel free to reach out to one of us in the team. But again, a huge thanks to our 3 speakers. I hope everyone has a good rest of the day, and speak to you all soon. See you later. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you.